Behind the sunglasses and the cool image was a man who could make even Paul Newman sweat, who clashed with Charles Bronson and who nearly fought Clint Eastwood over a role. His ego, his temper, and his secrets turned him into the most dangerous man in Hollywood, and today we're uncovering why the King of Cool was also the King of Fear, and how his rivals never recovered from crossing him. Steve McQueen wasn't just an actor, he was a force of nature, and in Hollywood, that force came with an ego so large it terrified everyone around him. McQueen had grown up with nothing, abandoned by his father, beaten by his stepfather, drifting through reform schools and the Marines. He carried that pain into Hollywood. To him, every movie wasn't just a role, it was a fight for survival. And that survival instinct made him ruthless. On set, McQueen wasn't content with being a star. He had to be the star. He was obsessed with screen time, dialogue, even the smallest details of how he was lit. Directors learned quickly, if McQueen thought another actor was stealing attention, he'd sabotage the scene. He would pause just long enough for the camera to cut back to him. He'd demand retakes, not because of mistakes, but because he wanted the spotlight fixed squarely on his face. This obsession with dominance created fear. Actors knew that working with McQueen meant war. If you had more lines than him, he'd cut them down. If your character looked stronger than his, he'd rewrite the script. Even Hollywood's most powerful names were not immune. Take The Towering Inferno. McQueen starred opposite Paul Newman, another legend, another powerhouse. It should have been a dream pairing, two giants of the screen working side by side. But McQueen turned it into a battlefield. He insisted on having the exact same number of lines as Newman, not one more, not one less. When he discovered Newman's character was written as more heroic, McQueen demanded changes. He wanted equal billing, equal importance, equal everything, and he got it. Newman himself admitted later that the experience was exhausting, not because of the stunts or the script, but because of McQueen's relentless need to compete. This wasn't paranoia, it was strategy. McQueen believed that if he ever let another man outshine him, even once, Hollywood would never see him as the King of Cool again. So he guarded his throne with iron fists, and his co-stars paid the price. It wasn't just Newman. James Garner, another star of the era, openly admitted he hated working with McQueen. Garner called him petty, insecure, and impossible. Why? Because McQueen would do anything to keep himself on top. During their time together, McQueen made constant power plays, stealing shots, forcing himself into the center of attention. Garner said he'd never seen an actor so consumed with control. Charles Bronson felt the same. He and McQueen started as friends, but when their careers collided, that friendship turned to ice. Bronson refused to work with him again, claiming McQueen's ego turned every set into a battlefield. Even directors tread lightly. They knew McQueen wasn't just stubborn, he was intimidating. He could explode in anger, walk off set, or worse, tank a movie by refusing to cooperate. Few dared challenge him, because challenging McQueen often meant losing. This constant battle for dominance made McQueen both respected and feared. He wasn't the kind of man you simply cast in your film. You had to prepare for war. Rival stars dreaded being paired with him because they knew what was coming. Negotiations, line counts, demands for rewrites, and a man who refused to share the crown. For Steve McQueen, ego wasn't weakness, it was power. It was his armor, his weapon, and his way of reminding Hollywood that no one, not even Paul Newman or Charles Bronson, could threaten his throne. And this was only the beginning, because McQueen's rivalries didn't stop at line counts and billing. They escalated into full-blown wars that shook Hollywood to its core. By the late 1960s, Steve McQueen wasn't just a star. He was the star. His face sold tickets. His name alone guaranteed box office success. But that kind of power doesn't just earn respect, it breeds enemies. And McQueen's rivals weren't just competitors. They were fellow legends. Let's start with Paul Newman. Their rivalry was legendary. Newman was polished, classy, Hollywood royalty. McQueen was raw, gritty, the street fighter who clawed his way up. When the two collided in The Towering Inferno, the tension was electric. Fans saw it as a dream matchup. But on set, it was a nightmare. McQueen demanded script changes so that his firefighter character would appear just as heroic as Newman's architect. He counted lines, demanded equal screen time, and even fought for who got the final heroic moment. The two stars barely spoke between takes. Crew members whispered that every scene was a duel, not of acting, but of ego. By the end of filming, Newman was so drained he swore he'd never work with McQueen again. Then came Charles Bronson. The two had once been friends, even neighbors. But McQueen's success quickly overshadowed Bronson's. Whenever they were up for the same role, McQueen usually got it, and Bronson never forgot. Their friendship soured, turning into icy silence. By the early 70s, Bronson outright refused to appear in films if McQueen's name was attached. Hollywood insiders called it one of the coldest rivalries in town. James Garner wasn't afraid to speak out either. He described McQueen as petty, insecure, and competitive to the point of madness. Garner said working with him was like walking on eggshells, never knowing when McQueen would blow up or undermine him just to get the spotlight back. For Garner, McQueen wasn't a co-star. He was a storm waiting to happen. And then there was Clint Eastwood. McQueen was offered Dirty Harry before Eastwood, but he turned it down. Not because he didn't like the role, but because he feared being typecast as a cop. But when Eastwood took it and turned Dirty Harry into an icon, McQueen was furious. He claimed the role was beneath him, but behind the scenes, he knew Eastwood had scored a career-defining win. Their rivalry simmered quietly, each man aware the other was a threat. McQueen's competitiveness wasn't just about roles. He brought it into everyday life. If a rival bought a new sports car, McQueen would buy a faster one. If another actor threw a party, McQueen made sure his was wilder. He raced motorcycles not just for fun, but to prove he was faster, tougher, more dangerous. These rivalries weren't hidden. Hollywood knew about them. Reporters wrote about the tension. Producers feared it, and audiences felt it. McQueen didn't just act in films. He turned his career into a constant battle, making enemies out of anyone who dared stand beside him. And yet, this never weakened his legend. If anything, it fueled it, because the more his rivals complained, the more McQueen looked like the rebel Hollywood couldn't control. He wasn't just fighting for screen time, he was fighting to prove that no one, not even Paul Newman, Charles Bronson, or Clint Eastwood, could dethrone the king of cool. But McQueen's wars didn't end with rival actors. They followed him into casting decisions, scripts, and even love affairs. And soon, the women of Hollywood became another battlefield, one that brought even more chaos into his life. By the early 1970s, Steve McQueen was at the absolute peak of his power. He could choose any role, name his price, and still walk away if he didn't feel it was right. But one decision would haunt him forever: the day he turned down Dirty Harry. The role was first offered to McQueen. The script was gritty, violent, and raw, the kind of character who embodied danger, toughness, and coolness. It was everything McQueen already represented in real life. Hollywood assumed he'd jump at it, but McQueen refused. Why? Some say he was tired of playing cops. Others claim he didn't want to be tied down to another franchise, afraid it would limit him. But behind the excuses, there was a deeper truth. McQueen hated being compared. He knew that if Dirty Harry became a hit, people would say it was the role, not the man, that made him a legend. And Steve McQueen never wanted to share his crown with anyone, not even a fictional cop. When Clint Eastwood stepped into the role, everything changed. Overnight, Eastwood's career exploded. Dirty Harry wasn't just a hit. It became a cultural phenomenon. Suddenly, Eastwood was being called the new face of tough, no-nonsense masculinity. Headlines praised him as the future of Hollywood action. McQueen was furious. He publicly downplayed the role, saying it was beneath him. He insisted that Eastwood had only succeeded because he, McQueen, had passed on it. But behind closed doors, friends said he was livid. The role had been his, and now it was the defining moment of someone else's career. The rivalry between McQueen and Eastwood only grew from there. Producers noticed the tension. They whispered that McQueen was paranoid. Eastwood would replace him as Hollywood's top rebel, At parties, McQueen would glare at Eastwood, dismiss him with cold remarks, and brag about turning down Dirty Harry as if it were a wise choice. But those close to McQueen knew better. It ate at him. What made this feud so intense wasn't just the role, it was what it represented. McQueen had built his reputation on being the ultimate outlaw, the man who couldn't be tamed. Dirty Harry embodied that same energy, and Eastwood wore it like armor. Suddenly, McQueen wasn't alone in his kingdom. There was another rebel in town, and he was stealing headlines. Hollywood insiders say McQueen's competitive streak went into overdrive after this. He became more aggressive with producers, more demanding on set, and more unpredictable. He refused scripts if he thought they were too similar to Eastwood's projects. He even insisted on being paid more than Eastwood, just to prove who really ruled Hollywood. But the truth was clear. The shadow of Dirty Harry followed him. McQueen could still open a movie, still pack theaters, still make directors sweat with his presence. But he knew, and Hollywood knew, that Eastwood had claimed a piece of the throne. And that only made McQueen more dangerous, because when Steve McQueen felt threatened, he lashed out. His temper grew shorter, his fights with rivals grew nastier, and his fearsome reputation deepened. No one wanted to challenge him directly, because they knew McQueen would never back down. For Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry was the role of a lifetime. For Steve McQueen, it was the scar of a missed opportunity, and the spark that intensified his war with Hollywood. And if McQueen fought Eastwood on screen choices, he was just as ruthless off-screen. Because when it came to women, McQueen's competitive streak turned into obsession, and the entire Hollywood elite felt it. If Steve McQueen was feared for his ego on set, he was equally feared off-screen for another reason: his reputation with women. McQueen wasn't just the king of cool, he was Hollywood's ultimate bad boy, and he carried that image into every relationship. Married, single, it didn't matter. McQueen had a weakness for women, and his affairs became the stuff of legend. But behind the whispers and the gossip, there was something darker. His love life didn't just cause scandal. It sparked jealousy, rivalries, and fear throughout Hollywood. His first marriage to actress Neely Adams should have been a fairy tale. She was talented, glamorous, and devoted to him. But McQueen's insecurities and his obsession with control poisoned the relationship. He demanded loyalty, but rarely gave it back. Neela later revealed he cheated relentlessly, sometimes openly, as if daring anyone to call him out. When she confronted him, McQueen's temper flared. To the outside world, they looked like a golden couple. Inside their home, McQueen ruled with paranoia and jealousy. It didn't end with Nyla. After their divorce, McQueen's affairs with leading ladies became infamous. During the filming of The Getaway, he began a high-profile relationship with Ali MacGraw, a married woman at the time and one of the most sought-after actresses in Hollywood. Their scandalous romance destroyed MacGraw's marriage to producer Robert Evans and sent shockwaves through Hollywood. For McQueen, it was another victory, proof that he could take what he wanted, even if it meant humiliating one of the most powerful producers in the industry. Evans never forgave him, but McQueen's charm wasn't just romantic, it was strategic. Rivals feared putting their wives or girlfriends near him, terrified he'd steal them away. Stories circulated about parties where McQueen would quietly make moves on the partners of other stars, knowing it would spark tension. It wasn't just desire, it was dominance. To McQueen, winning over a woman wasn't about love, it was about proving he could beat any man in the room. One of the most infamous stories came during his rumored closeness to Faye Dunaway on the set of the Thomas Crown Affair. Whether the rumors were true or not, the gossip was enough to rattle Hollywood. Husbands grew nervous, directors feared scandals, and McQueen basked in the chaos. All of this fed into his legend, but it also created enemies. Behind the smiles and handshakes, fellow actors despised him. They saw him as reckless, dangerous, someone who would burn bridges just to prove he could. McQueen didn't just compete with his rivals on screen, he competed in their personal lives, in their marriages, and in their reputations. His behavior created a kind of paranoia around him. Co-stars worried he'd undermine them in the script. Producers worried he'd seduce their wives. Directors worried he'd walk off set. And rivals worried that no matter how powerful they were, McQueen would find a way to outshine them. The fear wasn't just about losing roles. It was about losing face. In Hollywood, image was everything, and McQueen had the power to destroy it. That made him not just intimidating, but terrifying. But McQueen's destructive streak didn't stop with his affairs. His addictions, the drinking, the partying, the racing, made him unpredictable. And soon his off-screen recklessness would spill directly into his career, creating chaos that no one in Hollywood could ignore. Steve McQueen had money, fame, power, and the world at his feet. But he also had demons, and those demons made him one of the most unpredictable men in Hollywood. To understand why Hollywood feared him, you have to understand the habits that drove him. McQueen lived for extremes. Fast cars, wild parties, drinking, drugs. He thrived on chaos. He once said, "Racing is life. Anything that happens before or after is just waiting." That wasn't just bravado. It was a warning. On the racetrack, McQueen pushed himself to the edge. He wasn't content to simply drive. He had to dominate, even if it meant risking his life. He entered real races under fake names just to prove he could compete with professionals. Co-stars and producers dreaded his racing addiction. Every time he revved an engine, they feared they'd lose their star before the cameras even rolled. Insurance companies balked at covering him. Studios whispered about canceling projects if McQueen refused to slow down. But he never did. Offset, his habits were just as destructive. He partied hard, often disappearing for days in a haze of women, alcohol, and excess. Directors never knew which McQueen would show up, the brilliant professional who could deliver magic in front of the camera, or the reckless rebel who stumbled in late and unprepared. His volatility wasn't just inconvenient, it was terrifying for producers spending millions on a film. And then there was his temper. McQueen had a reputation for exploding at the smallest slight. A co-star stealing attention, a director giving too many notes, a crew member showing disrespect. It could trigger his rage. He fought with stuntmen, clashed with directors, and wasn't afraid to throw punches when he felt disrespected. On the set of The Great Escape, crew members recalled McQueen storming off for days at a time when he didn't like how his character was portrayed. No one dared confront him directly, because McQueen's fury was legendary. Hollywood stars didn't just fear his ego, they feared what he might do when pushed too far. Was he going to sabotage a scene, start a fight, walk off set and tank the entire production? That uncertainty made him dangerous. Even his addictions fed into his paranoia. McQueen lived in constant fear that someone was out to get him. He carried firearms for protection, even to public events convinced enemies were watching him. His close friends said the paranoia only deepened as his fame grew. The bigger the star, the bigger the target. And McQueen was always ready for a fight. Yet somehow these dark habits didn't destroy him. They made him larger than life. Every story of a brawl, every rumor of a wild night, every whispered scandal only added to his legend. Hollywood might have feared him, but audiences adored him. To fans, he wasn't just an actor. He was the real deal. A rebel who lived as dangerously off-screen as he did on it. But behind the cool image, the fear, and the chaos, McQueen was still human. And his darkest habits carried a price. They left him exhausted, alienated, and constantly at war with the people around him. The same behavior that built his legend also tore at the edges of his life. And when illness finally struck, those dark habits, the addictions, the paranoia, the battles, shaped the way Hollywood remembered him. Not just as the king of cool, but as the man its biggest stars secretly feared. By the time Steve McQueen passed away in 1980, he had carved out a legacy unlike any other. To the world, he was the king of cool. To his rivals, he was the man who could never be controlled. And to Hollywood itself, he was a star both adored and feared. What made McQueen's legacy so powerful wasn't just his films. It was the way he lived, defiant, reckless, and unapologetically himself. His co-stars remembered him as impossible, stubborn, and sometimes cruel. But even they admitted there was no one else like him. Paul Newman may have been Hollywood royalty, but McQueen had something different. He had danger. When audiences saw him on screen, they didn't see a polished performance. They saw a man who lived that life. The cars, the bikes, the fights, the risks. McQueen wasn't acting. He was showing the world exactly who he was. That authenticity made him unforgettable. His rivals, whether it was Newman, Charles Bronson, James Garner, or Clint Eastwood, all had their moments. But none could outshine McQueen's aura. Even when they feared him, they respected him. They knew that behind the fights and the ego was a man who had survived a brutal childhood, fought his way out of poverty, and built himself into a legend with sheer willpower. The same qualities that made him dangerous were the ones that made him iconic. His paranoia made him sharp. His ego made him unstoppable. His addictions made him unpredictable, and his competitive spirit made him larger than life. To fans, McQueen's story is inspiring because he wasn't perfect. He was flawed, deeply human, and constantly at war with himself. That battle between the cool exterior and the chaos underneath is what made him fascinating. It's why, decades after his death, audiences still revisit his films, still collect his memorabilia, still call him the King of Cool. Hollywood stars feared Steve McQueen because they never knew what he would do next. And in a business built on control, McQueen was uncontrollable. He didn't play by the rules. He rewrote them. He proved that you could be difficult, you could be rebellious, you could be dangerous, and still become a legend. In the end, fear and respect are two sides of the same coin. McQueen earned both. He intimidated his rivals, fought his producers, seduced Hollywood's most famous women, and still commanded the loyalty of millions of fans. And that's the legacy he left behind. Steve McQueen wasn't just feared, he wasn't just respected, he was unforgettable. Because in Hollywood's long history of stars and legends, there was only one true king of cool, and his name was Steve McQueen.